Hello and welcome to Hindsighting, where we discuss all the movies to win the Best Picture Oscar and try to figure out if this picture truly is the best or is time rendered a different verdict. I'm Edward Clow. My guest today is a semi-finalist in the Nickel Fellowship for his script Ghosts of Kiev. He made the 2015 blacklist for his script Castle Drive. His latest script, All Things Broken, sits in the top 1% of the blacklist website. He sold his pitch for Special about the woman who created the Special Olympics and wrote the screenplay. Currently, he's a prosecutor in Baltimore City. Matthew Scott Weiner, thank you for joining me.
Hello, Ed.
Today, we're hindsighting not a single movie, but an entire decade. This is our last conversation about the 2000s. This is the end of our first season. So, Matt, you know what I think about the 2000s. Anybody who's listened to this show knows what I think. I'm, for the first time, not going to go through that whole thing again. Let's get right to it. What do you think about the 2000s?
Well, so I think that people are defined by the decades that they grew up in. And I'd say that those decades really amount to two decades: the decade of your childhood and the decade that transitions you from, childhood to adulthood, which is why I love the movie Boyhood so much, because if you watch it when you're young, you identify with the kid. And then if you watch it when you're older, you're like identifying with Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette. And you're like, man, this is a totally different movie. And that's because we change as we grow up. So I think for you and me, and for the listeners at home, Ed and I have known each other essentially since we were zygotes. And Ed introduced me to movies. He's why I love movies. He's why I wanted to be part of movies. And in the 2000s, we actually lived together for a good portion of it. And so that factors into this. So when we were growing up in high school, even though the 80s were part of our vernacular, the 90s is what we grew up with. I mean, that's kind of what took us into college.
Yeah.
Then when 2000 hit, I was in grad school. So in 2000, I had graduated college. I was in grad school and still a kid, essentially. And then in 2010, I was married. My wife was pregnant. I was leaving Los Angeles to move to Baltimore to be a prosecutor. That's a big shift. That's a big life shift. When we were in high school, the 80s and 90s, that's kind of nostalgic for that reason, right? Like, so we look fondly upon those movies because it was part of our routine. We were going to the movies every weekend. It was a thing we would do. We would talk about them. We would, bet on the Oscars, and we were we were learning about composers. We were learning about films. When I'd come to your house and we would like, okay, what are we going to watch tonight? Back in the days of VHS, we'd go into your room and you had your shelves filled with VHSs that I'd never heard of these movies before, the Magnificent Ambersons, or so, 3 Days on of the Condor, or whatever, right? Like these movies that I never heard of, and we just pick one and put it on, and it exposed me to a new director or a new movie or a new composer, and it really kind of shaped how I looked at film going into college. In the 2000s, we were becoming adults, and the routine was a little bit different, and it was still part of our daily life, but now we were trying to be a part of that industry. And so we were watching it change in real time. And I think of it very fondly because I think that the 2010s and the 2020s are so much worse than the 2000s. And so while I agree with you that the 2000s were kind of way, way, way not as groundbreaking as the decades before, I think we've just been on this like downward slide ever since. And so now when you look at the 2000s, there's some pretty good stuff in there.
So why do you think that's interesting? That's something I haven't heard before, having talked. You're the 11th person I've had this conversation with. And so you think the 2010s and 2020s, which we're halfway through, are worse?
Yeah, I just think it's getting worse. I mean, I think as you go into the later decades, you're going to have to start including streaming in order to find the good stuff. And the aughts, right? I mean, we call them the aught one, aught two, or is it the 2000s or is it the aughts?
I say the 2000s. We never got a straight fucking answer on this. So I just say the 2000s and no one corrects me, or at least they're polite enough not to. So
well, hopefully I'm using aught correctly.
No, I mean, I've heard aughts also. So I think that's kosher.
Well, so in the aughts, HBO started to show the industry that they could put out features that were as good, if not better, than what was coming out in the theater. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But now you look at what comes out, and movies like Rebel Ridge, for instance, which would have been an amazing, like experience in the theater. Like, I think the last movie I saw before COVID hit was Uncut Gems, and it was great in the theater, but I don't think it would be released theatrically today. So as you get further into the century, I think you're going to have to start including streamers.
I think including streaming is okay. I mean, I think the idea of, I mean, obviously I'd like to see everything theatrically released, but in the 2020 Oscars, they made an exception for streamers, and they made an exception that year because it was COVID. You know, a lot of those movies just legally could not get theatrical distribution. And so, I mean, obviously that was sort of an emergency, but I don't know that having to include streamers is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I take your point.
The beginning of every decade is kind of a holdover from the decade before.
Absolutely.
And so it takes a few years for a decade to kind of find its footing and its identity.
Yeah.
And you can really see this from the 70s to the 80s when you look at like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then you look at E.T., and those two houses could have been right next door to each other. They look exact. It's really, except for a couple of things like the kid wearing headphones and 3D glasses.
Right. The tech.
Yeah. The aesthetic is essentially the same.
Sure.
And then when you look at the 90s to the 2000s, I mean, Memento was filmed in 99, but it came out in 2000. And so I think for a couple of years, you got these movies that were greenlit in the 90s and shot in the 90s.
Yeah.
And then they just happened to be released in the aughts, but it still had that 90s feel.
I agree.
And then, unfortunately, though, because of 9/11, the 2000s didn't have a chance to find its footing, right?
Hard
so
agree,
it took a little extra time.
Yeah.
But the big thing that I saw between the 90s and the 2000s, and you can blame the Matrix for this, honestly, the Matrix and X-Men is, and Gladiator, actually, in 2000, is the switch from Technicolor Eastman Kodak to digital, because even though films were still being shot on Technicolor Eastman Kodak film, they were now being processed and digitized. And so what that does is when you digitize the film, you can do anything you want with the contrast and the colors. And so you started getting these really high contrast movies with these really muted colors. So when I think of the 2000s, I think of colors, right? Like, I'll throw out a movie. You tell me what color it represents. Matrix.
Ooh. I feel like this is a test I'm going to fail. I'd say green because of the opening shot of
green. Absolutely.
I got it
green.
right. Okay.
Like Gladiator is gold.
That I see.
Gold.
That was our first
Traffic
episode.
Is yellow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're seeing these high contrast, like really pushing color. And so the 2000s kind of feel like really flat aesthetically. So when you get a movie that kind of bursts with color, it kind of stands out among all the other stuff of that decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we started to get away from that a little bit into 2010.
I think that's an interesting wrinkle to this, because I had talked with several of my guests about how there's a push and pull between going from film to digital. Slumdog is the first movie shot, I think, 95% on digital to win the Best Picture Oscar. Every Best Picture winner is digital now, with exception like Oppenheimer isn't. I talked a lot about how, people like George Lucas and Michael Mann opted to shoot digitally. Michael Mann shot a Tom Cruise movie digitally because he was just curious about it, and I don't think he's gone back. George Lucas shoots Episode 2 digitally, and Soderbergh and Fincher and all these people switched to digital. So I think this color thing is really interesting, and you're the first person to bring it up, because maybe what I'm not responding to for the majority of these movies is this kind of like flatness.
Well, it's
really interesting.
My son doesn't want me to mention him on any sort of podcast or social media. He tries to stay away from it. But I asked him, because he's 15. I'm like, well, what do you think of the 2000s? Because that's the era right before you were born. So for you, it's like the 80s was to us, or something like
but
that.
The 70s,
right?
really.
or the 70s, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, as he's learning about movies, he's watching a bunch of stuff in the 2000s. He's like, ugh, it's so blue. And so it's like whenever we're like, hey, let's watch a movie, let's watch Inside Man. Ugh, it's so blue. Okay, well, let's watch Rain of Fire. Ugh, it's so yellow. And so it's like even Changing Lanes. I tried to get him to watch Changing Lanes, and we got like 2 minutes in. He's like, ugh, it's so blue.
Interesting. So Matt and I each made a top 10 list of the top 10 movies of the 2000s. We're going to be going obviously from 10 all the way up to number 1. Matt's been working really hard on this list, as have I. I made not last minute, but a couple of weeks ago, I made a change to my list. I know Matt's list has been like a newspaper, probably different every day. And so let's get right to it. Matt, I'll start with you. What is your number 10 movie for the 2000s? Hit me.
So it was Dark Knight. And it got bumped. And you're right, I've been changing it because I've been rewatching these movies. And it got bumped for Pan's Labyrinth. I am not a Guillermo del Toro fan. I'm just not. I think he's a fantastic creature designer. And I think he's a great director. But I think he works best with other people's materials. I know Pan's Labyrinth was his, but over time, so in the 2000s, Del Toro did Pan's Labyrinth. I think he did Kronos also, maybe Devil's Backbone. I don't know if those were those might have been in
those might have been in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah. and Hellboy 2, Blade 2, and Hellboy, they were all like visually stunning. They were great. Blade 2 is, I still think, in the top 5 best comic book films of all time. And Hellboy 2 is extremely perfect for the tone of that comic and its practical effects. They had costumes and animatronics, and it was so much fun. But Pan's Labyrinth, I think, is his only film that really means anything. And the character's design for the Fawn and how he shot it and how he did all the practical effects and the ambiguity of, is it happening, or is this girl just trying to find refuge in a horrible situation? There's so many layers to that movie that when I rewatched it, I was just as captivated, upon a 10th viewing as I was the first. And it's also one of my favorite scores from the decade as well, because it's intentionally supposed to feel like a nursery like rhyme, right? It's da, 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 da. And it's just it's so opposite to the violence on screen that it kind of makes me think of American Werewolf in London, where it goes from like comedy to horror and it just keeps you on tilt. And so the music and the visuals in Pan's Labyrinth just work so well because they're so opposite to each other that I just think it's one of those movies that I would put as a near perfect movie from a director who I'm not a huge fan of.
So obviously this is your favorite Del Toro movie.
By far, yeah.
By far. Yeah. I think that was a big movie for him because in this decade he goes from someone who's kind of culty, and then he gets, Blade 2, I guess, being the first one. I mean, he's probably one of those early examples. I mean, pre-Nolan getting Batman by like a year or two, he's one of those early examples of like an indie-ish auteur being handed a piece of IP. It's not the first time that it's happened, but as far as comic book IP, it's definitely, I guess Ang Lee doing the Hulk a year earlier was the first time. And that that was a controversy.
So well.
Yeah, it didn't go so well, but that was definitely one of those things when it happened. It was like, oh, interesting. Okay, so Pan's Labyrinth. Okay, like it. That's a good choice.
Right. What about you, Ed? What's your 10th?
So my 10th, and it's really fucking hilarious, is my 10th is The Dark Knight. So
we were very close.
We were very, very close. So yeah, The Dark Knight. While I think this movie is a few yards short of the masterpiece that everybody hails it as, I still think this movie really rips. This, I think, will be always the premier example of an auteur filmmaker elevating IP. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best, but this is going to be the dragon that they're chasing forever. Christopher Nolan, this was the second movie. The first one went really well, but this one, most people agree, is worlds better than Batman Begins. I agree with that sentiment. So this is the dragon that everyone's been chasing. They're gonna keep trying, God knows. So when I heard this story that when George Clooney was making Out of Sight, he was in this kind of tight two shot, and the director of photography kept saying, "You're going out of the shot." And George Clooney got kind of frustrated and he said, like, "Well, what do I only have an inch and a half to move?" And the DP said, "Yeah, but within that inch and a half, you can move as much as you want." That to me sums up this entire decade. That the inch and a half is IP, and within that inch and a half, you can make any movie that you want. Because I think The Dark Knight is really subversive, it's really ambitious, it's really dark. I mean, our friend David Sipkin kind of, I thought, had the best take on it. He said, like, imagine if Scorpio, the villain from the Dirty Harry movie, was the Joker. You
Mhm.
know? And I don't know if that was an actual reference because Christopher Nolan talked a lot about heat. That's very prevalent. But I think Heath Ledger's hair, I mean, he looks a lot like Andy Robinson in Scorpio. I mean, in the Dirty Harry. I mean, he has a I don't know if that's me reaching, but it for all the talk about The Dark Knight being like Heat, which is obviously there. William Fichtner's in the very opening scene of it. Um, it is a lot like Dirty Harry. It's a lot about like, the cop and the killer, how similar are they? Like what's the difference between these two guys? I don't really have to push a lot about The Dark Knight because you legally weren't allowed to talk about anything else for like a year after it came out. Like if you were
Yeah.
talking about another movie, somebody would tap you on the shoulder, like, no, 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 that's enough of that Dark Knight. Talk about The Dark Knight. What I like about Dark Knight is that they're none of the MacGuffins that sort of slow down the worst of the Marvel movies. The stakes in this are pretty level. They're pretty realistic. I think if a great movie is judged by all the wrong lessons Hollywood takes from it, then boy, here's a great movie.
Yeah, and the only thing that keep that the reason that Pan's Labyrinth knocked it out of the 10th spot is because there's so many things about Dark Knight that I do have take issue with, like that I have a love hate relationship with. Right,
Like what?
Maggie Gyllenhaal was not an upgrade for Rachel. Um, and the scenes with her I find, and I love her as an actress. I think she's a great actress, but every scene with her is pretty painful. She's kind of playing it like this. It's like that's not what the character's supposed to be like. And then like Two Face is, again, Aaron Eckhart, great actor. The part didn't give him much. It suffers from all the bad Christopher Nolan exposition,
Mhm.
dead wife, like all of the Nolan stuff you can find online that he repeats. It's all there in Dark Knight. It's also very blue, but but for those reasons, it's like I feel like if it just focused on the Joker instead of pushing that metaphor of Batman good, Joker bad, Two Face in the middle, right? Like it's like not
Yeah.
very subtle. That it could have been elevated a little bit more, but and this is like part of like the bonus stuff at the end of your episodes. The score to Dark Knight, the Zimmer score. There were two scores in the odds that broke through to the mainstream, in my opinion. Dark Knight and Gladiator.
Hmm.
Like I remember hearing football players talk about listening to the score to Gladiator
Oh, really?
before taking the field
Huh.
because it would pump them up and get them like fucking like supercharged to go play football.
Huh.
And the fact that they're both Hans Zimmer in a decade where he did a lot of forgettable stuff
Yeah.
shows like when he's like locked in, like he's like locked in and he can compose the shit out of anything.
Also, let's
So I just wanted
let's
to add that in there.
yeah, let's also it's Hans Zimmer, Dark Knight at least is Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. They
Right,
composed it
right.
together, so I want to include Mr. Howard in that
Yeah,
also.
because didn't James Newton Howard do Batman Begins?
Uh, I actually don't know offhand. I think so. I mean, from Dark Knight on, it's Zimmer and Nolan. I think until Tenet,
Mm-hmm.
possibly Dunkirk. I don't know, but I don't know.
Dunkirk, no, Dunkirk was Hans Zimmer. Yeah.
Okay, so I think until Tenet, which is Ludwig Göransson, and he's been on everyone since, and no doubt will do Odyssey also. All right, so Matt, give me your number 9 best movie for the 2000s.
My number 9 best movie of the 2000s is Shaun of the Dead.
Nice.
And it's my only comedy on here. Um, Maybe it's nostalgia because we used to walk around town a little inebriated going zibbity 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 zibbity, the way that they do in the movie. But the reason that I love Shaun of the Dead so much is that it, just like you were saying with Dark Knight, it elevates the genre. It elevates two genres. genres, comedy and zombie, right?
Mm.
Into this like, it could have been silly, it could have been Zombieland, it could have been forgettable, but there's such a heart in the middle of this movie, that it doesn't matter that it's a zombie movie. It's just a character movie. It's almost like a rom com, and they just have zombies in it.
Yeah.
But it's a rom com in the way that Chasing Amy is a rom com, because you've got like the bromance, and then you've got the romance,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got all of the tangential characters, which all conflict. They're different worldviews, and they push the characters in different directions. And it's really a movie about split loyalty, and what are you going to do? But my favorite thing about Shaun of the Dead is, and I think we talked about this before, it does something that I find like so amazing that they did this. Is at the beginning of the movie, when things are going bad for Sean, he's sitting at the Winchester at the pub, and he's drinking a beer, and his buddies like, he's like, well, what do you want to do tomorrow? And they go through like this whole thing of what they're going to do tomorrow. We're gonna start with a Bloody Mary, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to come back to the Winchester, and they go through this like little monologue of like their plan for the day of doing nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the plot of the movie. They start the next day. They see the zombie in their backyard. She's got a name tag, I believe, that says Mary, and they kill her. That's Bloody Mary. And then they go through like the entire thing. They end up back at the Winchester. So they lay out the plot of the movie in a way that you're not expecting.
Huh.
And that is right on the heels of the opening of the movie, where Sean leaves and walks to the grocery store, and you see everything, and he like gets his like milk or whatever, and then he comes back and he's like so oblivious to everything that he doesn't see anything happening around him. Right after that scene, when he wakes up the next day, same exact shot, but in the background everybody's getting killed and eaten by zombies, but he's still so oblivious to everything because he starts as a selfish character, that now we're in the middle of like the end of the world, right? And so it kind of like fulfills the promise of like what that one speech gave us, which is like, here's what's gonna happen next, and then it just executes it so perfectly. So Shaun of the Dead, I agree with Quentin Tarantino, one of the top 10 films of the odds.
There's a great video essay by a guy I love named Tony Zhao, and he does one on Edgar Wright, and he just talks about how, particularly from this era, it's sort of right into our wheelhouse here. It talks about how comedies in the 2000s and a little bit before are just shot so flat. And he talks about how Edgar Wright is just so masterful at staging things visually and getting laughs. And he's talking about all of Edgar Wright's movies up to whatever, I don't know when he made this, it was a few years ago, but certainly the Cornetto trilogy was done. So he's sort of focusing on that. And I think Edgar Wright, I always wanted to ask, I've never met him, but if I ever met him, the question I'd want to ask him is he a fan of A Shot in the Dark, the Blake Edwards movie?
Yeah.
Because I think it reminds me of Shaun of the Dead, or rather Shaun of the Dead reminds me of A Shot in the Dark in this one way, is that A Shot in the Dark is, for people who don't know, after the Pink Panther, Inspector Clouseau is in another movie that has nothing to do with the Pink Panther, but it's a thriller that was going to be made seriously as a thriller with Peter Sellers, and then he had the idea to like, let's just make it Inspector Clouseau, and Blake Edwards ran with that. But the reason I'm comparing it in relation to Shaun of the Dead is that both these movies are great examples of the genre that they're parodying at the same time. And I think that you have to be such a skilled filmmaker to do that. And I think that, I think Edgar Wright is so in command, like the things you're talking about. There's so many subtle things that he does, and everything. I mean, just like Wes Anderson or the Coens, nothing in an Edgar Wright movie is just captured on the day. It's just accidental. Nothing is running gun.
Wasted.
Nothing's wasted. Nothing's running gun though. Nothing's improvisational. I really like this whole trilogy. I know Shaun of the Dead is the most popular one. I'm a little partial to Hot Fuzz because that's a genre that I know better. But I like looking at these movies all together. On the dubious notion no one was talking about Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The End of the World, or The World's End. Sorry. I think that it's a really interesting trilogy, and Simon Pegg is in all three of those, as is Nick Frost. And I think it's an interesting sort of way to look at just sort of the arc of Simon Pegg. Like, he's not playing the same character, but like he's playing, because in Hot Fuzz, he's playing the most responsible person, the most followed by the, I think his performance in that's actually kind of incredible because, first of all, he got in really great shape Like he's like really lean and mean, and he's totally credible as like this super cop guy. And if you
Well,
just
you and I just talked about it the other day, right? Like we're watching. Well, I'm watching Slow Horses right now,
yeah,
and the lead in that I
Jack
mean,
Loudon.
yeah, like he looks like Simon Pegg in Hot Fuzz. Like it's kind of funny. It's like
Yeah.
if Simon Pegg had gone in a different direction, he could have been Bond, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They look like they could be brothers. Absolutely.
Mm.
So yeah, Shaun of the Dead, great choice. What's funny again is my number 9 is also my only comedy, at least in totality. So for number 9, my pick is Anchorman. So in a decade that was absolutely crammed with unfunny comedies that captured everybody in the world but me, Anchorman is by far the best comedy of the 2000s. And astoundingly, it's the smartest comedy given how fucking absurd this movie is. I also think this is the most quotable movie in a decade with 4 Tarantino movies. I mean, the I can't think of anything more relevantly memeable than that escalated fast. I think not all the styles of humor here completely gel, but this movie is just really, really funny. I also think it has something to say, but it doesn't go up its own ass about it the way that a lot of other movies that follow it do. Yeah, I think what's also fascinating is that Ron Burgundy, again, on the one hand, he's very absurd, but he still feels like a real character. He still feels like it's just a really like well thought out character and unlike Shaun of the Dead, this movie is incredibly improvisational. This movie is something. There's a great book called There's a great book called Kind of a Big Deal that's all about the making of this movie that just came out that I highly recommend because it's a real nuts and bolts look at like how they put this movie together and what was cut out. And
Well, fun fact is that this came out when we were living together in
oh
L.A.
yeah,
When I was doing background work, and I was in Anchorman
mhm.
in a scene that was cut out. It's a bank robbery scene. I think they might have put it in the sequel or something.
No, they did a spin-off movie. You're taking me right to my next point. So they took all the deleted material from this movie and made a movie called Wake Up Ron Burgundy that went straight to DVD. It's honestly not that funny. There's funny bits in it. Um, but I think that takes you right to my like Dark Knight. I think some really bad lessons were learned from this movie, particularly too many alt lines. And I think this movie has just the right amount of sidekicks. But I think in the movies that follow, even like a year later, there's so many fucking sidekicks in this movie that I want to call the fire marshal because there's like too many people that don't need to be there. But like Dark Knight, you know, great movies beget bad ones.
It's just like Shaun of the Dead. It's a man baby movie, right? It's
Oh yeah,
a grown man baby, and in that decade, you've got the Apatow man baby. That's kind of the formula. You have 40-year-old virgin. You have Knocked Up. I think Superbad was in the 2000s,
yeah.
right?
Same year's Knocked Up.
Yeah, and so it goes through to like Brothers and all that kind of
Forgetting Sarah
stuff.
Marshall. I mean,
Mhm.
all of them. Yeah.
It's all the man baby movies. And so what Anchorman did so well was take the man baby prototype and turn him into an alpha male and then throw a woman in it and see what happens. And he kind of glitches, right? And it's like what happens when the man baby alpha glitches, and it's just hilarious. I mean, the improv that they kept in that movie works so well.
Yeah.
And you can see from the sequel that the improv that they kept in that one did not work well, that the movie could have gone south so quick that it's kind of amazing that it turned out the way it did.
Yeah, Anchorman really is kind of a miracle. And I'm saying that, I don't think it's perfect. I think once they get to kind of the bear pit, there's funny jokes within that. But like, that's a situation that's just kind of too absurd even for me. But I don't care. The only thing that I really kind of ding this movie on is I wish and this is the opposite of what an asshole like me would normally say. I wish the theatrical cut was available on its own because even they put a lot of extra scenes even in the cut of just the movie, which still isn't very long. But I wish I could just see the theatrical cut because I really feel like that was their best swing at this. I feel like comedies. Woody Allen said this great thing, and I hasten to add, the longest Woody Allen movie is 2 hours and 5 minutes. And so his movies are typically between 86 and 105, between 85 and 105 minutes. Woody Allen said every movie of his would be better if it were just shorter. And again,
Yeah.
his movies are not long. And I think with comedy, that nothing applies more to that than comedy. Like
Absolutely. I think 85 minutes is the perfect length for a comedy. And you know what? Maybe one day you'll get the theatrical release of Anchorman. They just released the theatrical release of Amadeus. So, keep hope alive.
But I'm asking for a shorter cut of it, which is what I think is kind of
Oh.
funny. I'm asking for I don't want
An even shorter cut.
I want what we played in, I want what I saw in theaters in 2004 with you. And what I saw in video a few months later was already like, they kind of drop scene. Like there's a scene where it like jumps forward to like Ron and Veronica being married and they have 2 kids. And that scene's just kind of a dud. And you can't, it's quick, obviously, but it's like, yeah. So, but Anchorman, I'll be positive here, is the funniest movie of the decade just in a walk, and I still find it funny. And people should definitely check out that book. So, Matt, what is your number 8?
In Bruges. In Bruges is my number 8 movie of the decade. And this movie could have been so forgettable if not for Colin Farrell, and I mean even Ray Fiennes is like the performances in this movie are so fantastic, and the cinematography is so perfect, and the reveals of like why Colin Farrell's is, I don't want to give anything away for people who haven't seen it. But this is a director who, before he did In Bruges, he was a playwright. I think he did like a ton of plays.
Yeah.
And so this might have been his feature debut.
It was. He won an Oscar for a short film he made with Brendan Gleeson a couple years before. This is his feature debut. He was and still remains a playwright.
Banshees is a spiritual successor to In Bruges, and sort of like how I think of Unforgiven as being a spiritual successor to High Plains Drifter.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you like Banshees, you got to watch In Bruges. And I don't want to give anything away about it because it is a very talky movie, but for a reason. And it's because the characters are talking as a way of avoiding emotion. And so once they start dealing with their emotion, they start talking a lot less and acting a lot more. And I found that to be a really interesting study in how to write a character, and how to direct a movie to take the audience through the progression of a character in a way that I hadn't seen before. In Bruges, pretty perfect movie, deserved to maybe even be higher on my list, but that's my number 8. Great
pick. Yeah, In Bruges is fantastic, and that's not a movie. It was the screenplay was nominated for an Oscar, which I'm happy to say. It did not win, but yeah, that's definitely a movie. I think it's a movie that's reputation is pretty burnishing. It's pretty, I think it's pretty strong, especially as as those two actors have continued to do really good work.
Well, the director too, right? Because in between this and Banshee, he made 3 Billboards. And that's such an underrated movie. I know it did well at the time, but I don't think people really remember it. And three Billboards is such a fantastic movie.
Yeah, 3 Billboards is a funny one because it was definitely a big deal at the time. It won 2 Oscars. It was nominated for like kind of everything, I think. And yeah, it's only been, I guess, 8 years, but I wonder where its reputation, it maybe got kind of lost in the shuffle. It's funny you bring that up because I've been wanting to revisit it because I remember really, really liking it. My number 8 movie is Catch Me If You Can. So
great pick.
Thank you. So Steven Spielberg took a break from this real downer, self-serious stage from the previous 2 movies, and he makes a movie that's really fun, but it still has like that trademark heart. This is one of the rare times in the 2000s where I was really, really excited about a movie. I'd read this book and it delivered. And boy, was that fucking rare in the 2000s. Back then, there were some nice surprises. In Bruges, I think, being one of them. Like a movie I didn't think anything would, I wasn't expecting anything from, it would surprise me. But everything I looked forward to in the 2000s was an exercise in anticipation.
Love it. I love that term.
Yeah, I do too. I think this is, up to this point, I thought this was Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance. I think he has since surpassed it, but I think him looking so young was an asset to this. I think he's credible as a teenager, even though he's almost a decade older. I think that you know, Tom Hanks took what was, a supporting role at a time when he was still like, headlining movies. He's still pretty young here. And I think he's really great in this. And again, it kind of adds to the luster of this because this is like two big movie stars, and it's like got this elegant, it felt, somebody compared it, it was sort of like almost like Ocean's 11 a year earlier, not in plot, but just it was like, oh, here's like a big studio movie with like big stars and it's got a big director, and it's fun and it's still kind of for grown-ups at the same time. I do think that I said way back in our Chicago episode that the opening credits for this movie
Mhm.
are a masterpiece, and that is a category we should have at the Academy Awards. And
I agree
we're
with that.
we're getting a stunt category, we're getting a casting category, all well deserved. Let's have a best opening title sequence because this is a decade where you see a lot of great opening title sequences. You've
Yeah,
got Panic
Panic
Room,
Room. Yeah,
Die Another Day, Catch Me If You Can,
yep,
25th Hour. Those are all in one year.
yep.
So I think that's a category we should have, even if we don't have it every year. I think Catch Me If You Can is just like the kind of thing a lot of other directors were floating around this. This was not something that Spielberg was developing for a long time. I think he did it. He shot it very, very quickly.
I remember
Um,
that. Yeah,
this thing he was shooting it in the summer and it came out in December, and it's very rare that Spielberg kind of like just hops onto something. I think there's something to him shooting quickly that he doesn't overthink things, and he's so competent, obviously, that it's not sloppy. So I almost think like Spielberg should be given like 3 months to make a movie and have to shoot it really quickly, not on a tight budget. But I think like the less time he has to think about. Because I mean, with Schindler's List, he shot it like Kubrick, and what I mean is like he showed up and was like, "How am I shooting this?" And that's not anything he'd ever done. Like he literally was just walking around the set with a viewfinder. Oh, let's do here, let's do this, and that's if you've seen the making of The Shining, that's what Kubrick did, and that's why Kubrick
yeah.
took so long to make movies. Is he was just like, well, "How do I want to shoot this? Let me figure this out."
And it's such stark contrast to the meticulous planning that he had to do for Saving Private Ryan for the D-Day sequence, right? So it's
Yeah, all of his movies.
like like Spielberg. So I think of Catch Me If You Can, like Spielberg unbuttoning the top button of his shirt and
Yeah,
exhaling,
yeah,
right? Like it was kind of like he was like, I'm gonna make a movie just for me now.
yeah.
And it's a special movie for me because it was my wife and I, it was our first date, was to go see Catch Me If You Can over Christmas when everybody left LA, and it was just the two of us. Again, nostalgia, transitioning from boyhood to adulthood, all of that gets wrapped up into it. But Catch Me If You Can, a very blue movie. Great choice, great pick. It almost hit it. It almost hit my list. It was between that and Munich. Neither of them ended up on the list, but I think it's so fascinating that you can look at this decade and see there's like two things going on. The new crop of filmmakers getting their footing and becoming auteurs, and the old guard showing that they can still show up and make interesting work. Because you got Alfonso Cuarón, you got Nolan, you've got Fincher, you've got all them coming up through this decade, and you've still got Spielberg and Scorsese, and you got like, you know, the old guard still showing up and teaching the young kids how it's done. Spike Lee making some great movies this decade.
Yeah, at least two that I could think of. Yeah, so what is give me your number 7.
Number 7 would have been Mystic River if the movie hadn't been ruined by its final scene. I found Mystic River to be uh, tremendous,
Mhm.
but the ending was like the ending of Lincoln. It's like just end it with like you stayed too long and you fucking ruined it.
So what
And
made your list
so
instead of Mystic River?
$1 Million Baby.
Wow.
So I swapped out Eastwood's. Eastwood did a lot of shit in the 2000s. I
Yeah.
mean, he was fucking busy in the 2000s.
Yeah.
And $1 Million Baby. So $1 Million Baby won Best Picture, right?
It did.
Yeah.
We covered it on the show
It
in
might
depth.
it might be the only Best Picture winner on my list, and I think it's cool that you and I haven't we haven't crossed yet. We haven't had the same movie yet on our list, but or maybe one of mine is higher on your list. But
Mhm.
$1 Million Baby subverted expectations so much for me that um, I compare it a lot to Dead Man Walking, which is one of my favorite films of all
Mm-hmm.
time. Like in my top five, it switches between The Shining and Dead Man Walking pretty on a daily basis, and they remind me of each other because it's just like you don't know what you're about to see when you walk into it, and you think you're going to see this movie about this like boxer. It's like a Rocky kind of thing, and
Yeah.
Eastwood's going to play like the Eastwood character, but like it's just you've got all this star power, and you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be like a Rocky movie, and then all of a sudden it takes this turn that's such a gut punch
Yeah.
that in the hands of a lesser artist could have felt so manipulative that it would have taken you right out of it, right? Like imagine another director doing Psycho and having that reversal when she gets killed and being like, oh man, they were setting me up for no reason. Now I like fuck this movie.
Right.
Like I watch $1 Million Baby and I can't turn away.
Yeah.
And it's like Full Metal Jacket. I can watch the first half of Full Metal Jacket and love it, and then stop and go do something else, or I can watch the second half of Full Metal Jacket and love it and go away and do something else. I don't even need to watch it as a full movie. When
you can spoil it because we have a whole episode about it. You can spoil
okay.
$1 Million Baby.
So
there's no way not to.
When she goes down and gets paralyzed, right? That movie becomes a completely different movie, and you can watch the first half and feel that sense of rush of champion of like, zero to hero, Cinderella, Rocky story, and walk away loving that movie. Or you could watch the second half of that movie and just fucking, drink yourself to sleep and everything is miserable. But, you understand why Eastwood does what he does at the end. And regardless of what your position is on euthanasia, it's like, it shows, but that's why I compare it to Dead Man Walking, because it unapologetically shows you all the different points of view.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make you choose which one to go with. And so I think about $1 Million Baby a lot when I'm writing, because I can only hope to be able to subvert expectation like that and not have the reader, come away from the material saying, oh, I feel manipulated. So $1 Million Baby, number 7.
Yeah, $1 Million Baby, it's not on my list, but it's definitely a movie that I loved, and it's a movie I loved right when I saw it. It was one of the times when the Academy Awards happened, I was like, yes, yes. It's funny because Suju Vijayan, who was my host for that episode, didn't really go along for the twist. She thought it was well done, and even calling it a twist isn't quite, because it's not a thriller. But she was really enjoying the movie until that thing happened, and didn't not enjoy it, but just wasn't along for it. And we had a really great conversation about it that I urge people, if they haven't heard that episode, to go back and listen to. But yeah, I $1 Million Baby is one it's funny. I upheld its Best Picture win, but I added Anchorman to it because I talked about how drama and comedy, and there's no better examples. Like this, I can't think of more two stark examples of the drama mask and the comedy mask. But $1 Million Baby, I'll try and be brief because I did an entire podcast about it, which I think you'll enjoy. You should listen to, because we both really like it. And I think it's a great choice. Yeah, it's funny because he was kind of hot after Mystic River. Mystic River was well received and also made over $100 million worldwide. It was
crazy.
A huge hit.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like this bright in a year that I think is the very worst of that decade, which is 2003. But it kind of felt like the 70s. It's like, wow, a studio's getting behind like a fucking adult drama, that's R-rated and is really sort of bleak and, but I think $1 Million Baby is even better because it's like lower stakes and there's no procedural things, there's no like law and like thriller things. And I think that, yeah, when I watched the first half of this movie, I was like, this is good. This is a good movie. Like the performances are good and I'm really enjoying it. And then when the accident happens, I was like, oh my God, this is devastating. And I talked a lot about, because I obviously rewatched it recently. I remembered $1 Million Baby. I remembered the story. I remembered how it ended. But when I'm revisiting these movies for this podcast, there's always things I just don't remember because it's been, maybe decades since I've seen them. There's a scene in $1 Million Baby that I can't get out of my head. That's when Hilary Swank's family comes to visit her, and they're just awful people. And the great Margot Martindale plays her mom, and, you know, that scene is so devastating, and what I love about it, and I talked about this on the podcast, is, Margot Martindale's a horrible person, and Hilary Swank tells her to fuck off, which feels almost like a rah-rah moment, but what I love what Eastwood does is his character standing out in the hallway, and Margot Martindale and the rest of the family are walking down the hall, and you hear her crying, like sobbing, and it's really far away, and it really just speaks to Clint Eastwood's sort of skill at this because we're not supposed to have empathy for this woman the closest thing this movie has to a villain, but she
Right.
is a human being and she is suffering, but he just plays it so far away. Like the term I always use with Clint Eastwood is just no bullshit. Even in his movies that don't work, he never pushes things. I mean, he always wants to get to his tea times. Maybe he's lazy, but he never sensationalizes things, never pushes things. And I think that if you are a skilled actor, he will get a great performance out of you. I think where younger actors tend to suffer at his hands or sometimes day players, like you will see some bad performances and stuff, but Million Dollar Baby has none of that. Like the cast, everybody in this cast is great. Very young Anthony Mackie, a young Jake Baruchel, Michael Pena
Yeah.
has a couple lines in it. Yeah, I mean, Million Dollar Baby is a devastating movie, and I think it's a little bit like, oh, it's so fucking depressing. And yes, there's no two ways about it. It is a heavy, heavy movie. But I think another thing I didn't remember, not to go on and on and on about a movie that's not even on my list, but since we did cover it on the podcast, I really loved because Suju brought up the idea about how, activists for the disabled had a problem with it. And I think that's legitimate, but I think that the movie answers that because, the Eastwood character is sort of struggling with this, what could be a bigger decision. And the Morgan Freeman scene, he says, like, I think Maggie would say that she had her best shot at it. I don't think the movie is saying, like, if this terrible thing happens to you, you should die. This woman
Mhm.
wanted to die. It was her choice, and he
Yeah,
needed to do this
I
for
don't think
her.
that Eastwood was trying to make a statement, and he's not shy about his politics. I don't think this
No.
was a political statement movie. And the scene that you referenced, I think about that scene a lot because again, it reminds me of Dead Man Walking,
Yeah,
where you're
family.
supposed to hate Matthew Poncelet, right? And
Yeah.
you learn to like, even though you hate what he did and you hate what he represents, he's a human being. And the day before he's executed, to spoil Dead Man Walking, sorry, Dead Man Walking is the term for walking to the fucking electric chair.
You've had 30 years to
But
watch it.
he's sitting in a room shackled with his family. You have this murderer, racist, this guy you're supposed to hate, sitting there in a room, and his mom is crying, and his brothers are reminiscing, and then they run out of stuff to say, and it's just silent.
Yeah.
And then they're like, "Well, it's time to go, everybody. All right, let's hug Matt one last time." And it doesn't matter how you feel about him; it just makes you. It puts you in the room in the same way that Eastwood puts you in the room.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And something that both those movies do also is, yes, it's a very heavy movie, A Million Dollar Baby, but there's a lot of comedy too. And I
Absolutely.
think one of the things that modern dramas forget is that to heighten the drama, you need comedy.
Yeah.
And a drama without comedy is insufferable.
Yeah.
And both these movies, they strike that balance, I think, perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great place to end that one. Well, it's funny. We're kind of in a funny rhythm with our list here. You said we haven't had anything dual. My number 7 is In Bruges, which is why
Hey,
I didn't say I was a little mum on your side. We didn't even talk about what to do if we had dual things, but I think we just figured it out. I didn't want to like talk. So um, everything you said, I agree with. I'll just kind of add to it briefly because I think you kind of covered a lot of the things that I like about this movie. Um, I think this is In Bruges is a great example of a movie is not about what it's about, but how it's about it. It might be one of the best examples of it because the trailer for this movie is terrible, and I don't know, to be fair, if you could cut a good trailer for this movie because I think that this movie it's kind of like, eh, you know, one of these movies that has like these wild shifts in tone. I really kind of compare it to something like these may seem like odd comparisons, but something like The Apartment or something wild, where it starts as one thing and it kind of turns into something else, but it doesn't abandon the earlier tone. But the idea of like two loquacious hitmen, even in 2008 was such a fucking eye roll because we were 14 years after Pulp Fiction. But again, I think, and you touched on this a little bit ago, the way that this movie oscillates between just like as gut wrenching a drama as Million Dollar Baby
Yeah.
to the most outrageous humor that's like belly laugh humor is approaching like Billy Wilder virtuoso, like The Apartment, which isn't as
I would agree with that because who would have thunk? I mean, what the fuck, Colin Farrell? Jesus Christ! Like, put him in everything.
well.
Right?
It's interesting because the timing is really interesting because I remember this 3 weeks before In Bruges comes out. Cassandra's Dream, which is a movie
Yeah,
he
yeah,
made with
yeah.
Woody Allen, which is not it's pretty obscure, and it's a solid Woody Allen movie, not one of his best, but the best thing about it is Colin Farrell's performance, which you see him basically have like this breakdown over the course of the movie. He starts out that movie, as like kind of this cocky, like compulsive gambler, and he's forced to commit a murder, and the guilt of that. I think he's tremendous in that movie. 3 weeks later, this comes out. This movie's worlds better than that movie. But as a 1-2 punch, I think the fact that Woody Allen cast Colin Farrell kind of against type. And the interesting thing about Colin Farrell, putting aside how the movie's turned out, he works with Spielberg, he works with Michael Mann, he works with Terrence Malick, he works with Woody Allen. He is being smart about who he works with. He works with Oliver Stone.
Yeah.
Not all these movies work out, and that's never really the actor's fault, but he is smart about the people that he's worked with. And I think that In Bruges is like he's finally given a piece of material that he's worthy of, and he's working with Brendan Gleeson, who I'd heard of, and I think the two of them have never been better than they've been in this movie. You could arguably make the same argument for Ray Fiennes. It's a slightly harder. That's a sterling career filled with great performances. So that's not one I will like go. Ray Fiennes has got a lot of incredible performances, so I'm not quite comfortable saying In Bruges is the best. But I do think that In Bruges is his funniest performance, and I never would have thought that Ray Fiennes could do comedy, except for the Wallace and Gromit movies where he's like the bad guy. But I don't want to discount those, God knows. But I think this movie is. I'll put it this way. This movie is a high wire act of dueling tones. I'm not even sure anybody would attempt now, and it certainly would not be in movie theaters now, this certainly would go straight to streaming, which again is an argument for maybe why the 2000s is better than I remember them. This was well received. I don't know how much money it made, but it gets an Oscar nomination for Best Screenplay, so it's not like this movie is quite underrated, and I think that it's...
No, and I think over time, because of Banshees, people have been revisiting it, and I don't see this movie going away. I think it has a following, and it's kind of like the Linkletter, franchise. The before, what do you call them? The before
movies, yeah,
the before movies. It's like they didn't set out to make that a franchise,
sure,
but they just kind of make one every decade, and it's got this huge following. And now you can watch these actors grow up together. That's why I like movies that feel, like I said, like spiritual successors to other movies, even if they're not the same characters.
Right. All right, Matt, let me have your number 6.
All right. So my number 6, this is the only film of this director that I can tolerate. Much like Pan's Labyrinth.
I was going to say, we have a theme.
And it just shows that I think, I'll say an overrated director can still make a fantastic movie. I think There Will Be Blood is one of the best films I've ever seen.
Wow. Okay.
And I am not a Paul Thomas Anderson fan.
Okay.
So here's why. There Will Be Blood is so prophetic about the world we're living in right now. And it's about, look, I mean, I watched it and I paused it when they had the first line of, I think it's 14 and a half minutes of silence.
Yeah.
And in that 14 minutes, you see the lengths that Daniel Day-Lewis will go through at, what's his name?
Daniel Plainview.
Yeah, Plainview. Like you see the lengths that Plainview will go to for, ambition, for more. It's never enough. Right off the bat, when he takes that baby, he's not doing it out of love. He immediately uses him to manipulate people to give him more chances, right? Like, this is my son and he's part of the family. And then it's like, we do this, we're all the family here. And so it's like, in that 14 minutes, you know that the rest of the movie is going to be him coming out on top above everybody else and being miserable the entire time and just bringing everybody down with him. And that's exactly what happens. And with Paul Dano, he turns out to be exactly what Plainview said he was from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually rooting for him, Paul Dano. You know how it flashes forward to the future, and he's rich, and there's electricity, and he's got a mansion and a bowling alley, and you know some stuff happens in that bowling alley at the end. And I won't spoil it if you haven't seen the movie. But Paul Dano comes back into the fold, and it seems like he's this pious guy who's like, you know, he is what he said he is what he always said he was. But it turns out that everybody's a liar. Everybody's a piece of shit. Mm-hmm. Humanity fucking sucks. Get a fucking helmet, right? Like, that's kind of like the theme of the movie. And to be able to pull that off in a 3-hour-long drama period piece that a studio got behind, that made money, that was scored by Johnny Greenwood, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's like one of the first time, and her, like, so Her was scored by Arcade Fire, right?
Yeah, that's years later, though. That's after
it was years later. But usually, you know, and Trent Reznor obviously has made a career, him and Atticus Ross doing scores.
Yeah.
But this was kind of the first time that I remember, aside from Danny Elfman, where, like, a musician put out an incredible piece of music that elevated the film itself. And so There Will Be Blood is shot so perfectly.
Yeah.
Is paced so perfectly. I'm sorry, Quentin, it's acted so perfectly.
I was wondering if you were going to go there.
Yeah. I think Paul Dano is a really good actor, but the scenes where he lets himself go to like level 11 in that movie, where he's giving his sermons, or the small touches of when he's waiting to be thanked before they like start the first oil rig, and Plainview brings up the girl, and he's just standing there silent, taking the abuse, knowing that he'll get his comeuppance later. There's just so much subtlety and things like that aren't said in the movie that I respect so much. And usually in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, too much is said, and it's still 3 hours long. So, yeah, There Will Be Blood, I think, is the absolute best movie to hit the middle of my list.
Yeah. It was a real sea change. I talked about this with our friend Alan Foreman in our 07 episode. There Will Be Blood was a real sea change for PTA because he hadn't made a movie in 5 years. And, you know, I like his early movies, but there was a real knock on them that he was really just biting a lot off Scorsese and Robert Altman and Jonathan Demme a little bit. And
yeah, because what was his one right before this? Punch Drunk Love?
Punch Drunk Love, but it was 5 years earlier, which you know, which is an interesting movie I haven't revisited. That movie definitely has a burgeoning reputation, but it's a long time. So when this came out, I was like, this is its own thing. I mean, there are influences all over it, obviously Giant and things like that, and but obviously he's metatextual like Tarantino and like really like all filmmakers. But yeah, this was, and the fact that he got the greatest living actor to give arguably his most famous performance. He wins an Oscar for this. It's only his second, not only. He wins an Oscar for this. I mean, this is conceivably the most iconic Daniel Day-Lewis performance, and he's already like about 50 years old. So he's already like well into his career. He's already before this considered, you know, maybe one of the best cinematic actors ever.
I think he might have created the meme. Right? Like, I Drink Your Milkshake might be the first meme ever. I don't know.
That's you know what, that feels true, and that's debatable. You need to ask somebody with way more social media savvy than myself. But yeah, I mean, this movie, and this was a movie that like right when it came out was a moment. This was not underrated. Like you said, it made a bit of money. It was nominated for a lot of Oscars. It won 2. Day-Lewis and Robert Elswit, who was a cinematographer, won. Well deserved for both of them. Yeah, this movie was immediately looked at as something important, and PTA ascends to this level of big time director, whereas I think his first 4 movies had admirers, you know, but he was still sort of on the ascent. And I think
Well,
this,
and I think that there's an undercurrent too, that it's almost like so I'm a big fan of First Reform. I
yeah,
think that movie's an amazing movie. I think you introduced me to it, actually. I hadn't, and when I saw it, I immediately bought it and watched it 3 more times. And it's about environmentalism, right?
yeah,
And There Will Be Blood. I think it's an environmentalist movie. The end of the movie, Plainview is literally screaming as he's sorry, I'll spoil, as he's
spoil away.
bludgeoning Paul Dano to death with a fucking. He's sitting there at the end, literally eating meat with his hands. Right, he's eating like he wakes up drunk and he's eating meat with his hands like an animal, and then he's beating Paul Dano to death with a wooden bowling pin, and he's literally screaming, "I am the third revelation! I am the third revelation!" Right?
Yeah.
And so, if you know what that means, he's saying like, first you had, I think, God, then you have me, and I am the Lord. I am I am your new religion, and that religion is capitalism and oil and money. And it's just so true that I think that you could see this as an environmentalist's kind of like,
I like that take.
wet dream. Yeah.
Okay, great pick, great movie. My number 6 is Match Point. From 2000 to 2005, Woody Allen made a slew of movies that range from slight misfires to the very worst movie of his entire 50-movie career. Brian De Palma said this great thing that directors have to sometimes get away from themselves, and that's why he made Scarface, because what did he know about Cuban gangsters in Miami? And Woody Allen does a very similar thing here, is that he goes to a new city, a new country, a young cast. There's no role in this movie that Woody Allen could have ever played, even 30 years before. While he tackled a lot of these themes, I'll even say he tackled these themes a little better in Crimes and Misdemeanors. Match Point is nastier, it's sexier, and at times it really is Hitchcockian. Like, there's a sequence in this movie, there's a murder sequence in this movie that I think is like nothing else he's ever even attempted, and I think it's just it's worthy of Hitchcock, which is never a sentence I thought I'd say in relation to Woody Allen, a filmmaker that I revere, as people who've listened to this podcast might have twigged by now. After this, it isn't like every movie after was a masterwork, but uh, even the things that don't work after this don't have the miserability of the misses that came before this. Um, I think that if Woody Allen is actually done making movies, as he says he is, this is his last masterpiece. There are great movies that follow: Vicky Cristina, Blue Jasmine, Coup de Chance, a few other. Those movies are great, but as far as like perfect masterpieces, I think this is Woody Allen's last masterpiece.
So was this his first London film, Match Point?
Yes. I mean, as far as, yes.
Yeah. And then right after this was Cassandra's Dream. And I remember, right. Am I right about that? There was nothing in between.
No, there was Scoop was in between. Yeah, it was 1, 2, 3 in London. So what happened is that London, the reason he switched this from the Hamptons to London is that London, or someone from the Film Commission of London, basically reached out to him and said, like, come make a movie here, we'll give you tax breaks. So he made, the same thing happened with us with Barcelona, by the way. So he made 3 movies in a row set in London: this, Scoop, and Cassandra's Dream.
Yeah. So, and I think we saw them all in the theater. I think I was living with you when all 3 of these came out.
Yeah, we did.
Match Point didn't feel like a Woody Allen movie to me, and I say that as a compliment.
Right.
And we won't get into Woody Allen, but
yeah,
in college, I was pretty much watching a Woody Allen movie every day.
Yeah,
and I think Crimes and Misdemeanors, Zelig. There's a handful of those earlier Woody Allen movies, Deconstructing Harry, that I think are perfect Woody Allen movies.
Right.
And I think after Match Point, the next perfect Woody Allen movie was Midnight in Paris, and I don't think that he made another one after that that I would say is like a true Woody Allen movie. Yeah, I mean, it's not on my list, but I understand why it's on yours.
Yeah, this is a movie I liked when it came out, and it's I earlier this year, there's a great book recently written about Woody Allen, and it made me, so he's made 50 movies. I hadn't seen 8. A lot of them were on the back sort of half. And I watched all the ones I hadn't seen, which included some early ones like Interiors and Stardust Memories. I had never seen those. I thought both those were really interesting.
Stardust Memories is great.
Yeah, Stardust Memories is definitely worth a look. But I hadn't seen a lot of these things that I had skipped, like Irrational Man and Cafe Society and a couple other ones, Rainy Day in New York and Rivkin's Festival. Two of those movies are really terrible. Two of them are Rainy Day in New York is not good. I do think Timothy Chalamet is actually sort of a fascinating Woody Allen avatar. Doesn't seem like he would be. Rivkin's Festival is miserable. He made a movie closing out this match point thing called Coup de Chance, which was the last movie he made, which is another movie wherein it's a thriller wherein an ordinary person is pushed into a crime. And I think it's a really interesting. It's less like Match Point. The Match Point is like Crimes and Misdemeanors, meaning the setup isn't the same because both Crimes and Misdemeanors and Match Point is a guy having to kill his mistress. Coup de Chance is not that, and Coup de Chance is sort of a really interesting. I highly recommend it. The movie's entirely in French, and it's really interesting to hear Woody Allen's language get taken away from him. And somebody made the point, which I think is true, is that I think Woody Allen, particularly in the last, I guess, the back nine of his career, probably progressed more as a director than he did as a writer. I think he grew more as a director because he was already, such a singular voice as a writer. And if you like Match Point, I think Coup de Chance, which again is entirely in French, and if that's his last movie, much like Juror Number 2, if that's Clint Eastwood's last movie, they're going out on a pretty high note, which considering how prolific those two guys were and how many, frankly, bad movies they made, that's not a guarantee. So that's it for this episode. Next week, Matt and I are going to return and talk about our best movies of the decade, 5 through 1. Till then, looking forward to looking back.